So I think we're at, this is number 7 in our series, Food Illness Outbreak Prevention and Detection. My name is Jay Well. I'm from OSU Pre-College Programs. Brittany Capel is with us from Oregon Ag in the Classroom. I just wanted to highlight partnerships that we have with Ag in the Classroom. We've been working closely with them for the past few years on a few USDA grants, one specifically around teacher professional development, where we have been creating lessons and sharing lessons around agriculture. And we have a lot of those on our website, not necessarily our virtual teacher professional development part of our website, but into our content part. And Oregon Ag in the Classroom has a lot of resources on their website. And this is also part of a PD STEP or a SPECA grant through the USDA that focuses on food safety. And next week, Thursday at 12 o'clock, we'll be having another one of these, sharing 3 new lessons that have been developed by OSU students all around food safety and food choices. So be sure to join us for that. And I wanted to give Oregon Ag in the Classroom an opportunity to talk about some of the resources that they have to offer as well.
Yeah, so like Jay mentioned, we have a number of lessons on our website, and we have a number of virtual farm field trips or virtual field trips that we are doing. And basically we use Zoom software like we're using today, and we go out to a facility and film and talk with either a manager or a owner of a farm, and they talk about their operation, and students have the opportunity to ask questions in real time and get answers. These are also recorded, and we have our past field trips on our website that you can look at, but we have one coming up here, I think it's June 4th, I believe, and it's at a berry patch, so that should be fun. So if you're interested in tuning in, you can find that on our website and register for that. And then we'll be continuing these throughout next school year as well. So if you want to be notified of upcoming ones, there's a form that you can fill out on our website, and we'll put that in the chat that you can stay up to date on upcoming tours.
Excellent, thanks for sharing. And we'll make sure there's a link on our virtual teacher professional development page to Oregon Ag in the Classroom. A lot of great resources there. So as we get going on this lesson, I like to start out talking about NGSS Connections, so we can always keep that in the back of our head. I think there's a lot of connections here going through the simulation. And here's a few that I was thinking about as we were putting this together. Attaining, evaluating, and communicating information is part of the science and engineering practices. You're going to see here that students, as they go through the simulation, are really going to have to dig around to find and evaluate information. And then the idea would be communicating that information to a larger audience. And that's really what happens with in food safety as they're tracking illness outbreaks, is obtaining, evaluating, and then communicating that information quickly so people do not get sick. Disciplinary core ideas, there's a number that fit here, and this is different. This is a different one that's actually in the lesson, but I think this one fits really well. LS 1-5, construct a scientific explanation based on evidence for how environmental and genetic factors influence the growth of organisms. Because really that's what's happening here. When there is an outbreak, you have a growth of pathogenic bacteria that are causing these illnesses, and we're going to learn about a few of them today. And cross-cutting concepts, cause and effect, patterns. I really like the idea of patterns, because you'll see as they're tracking the illness outbreak and trying to determine if it truly is an outbreak or if it's just background level bacteria, they really have to start looking at patterns. And I was unaware of the amount that goes into actually tracking and identifying one of these outbreaks until I did this simulation. So I think that's really interesting to keep in mind. I also think as we're in this time of distance learning, and that a lot of the 6 through 12 and the supplemental activity guidelines for distance learning for all that has been put out by ODE is really around cooking and modifying recipes, but I think a big part of that too can be food safety. And as we're encouraging young people to be cooking, we can also have them be thinking about how do I do that not only safely for my own physical harm, but also keeping the food that we're eating safe so we don't have any food poisoning outbreaks locally in our homes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brittany and talk more about food safety.
Yeah, so we kind of connect food safety with agriculture because we like to use agriculture as a context to teach in our classrooms or utilize in our curriculum. And so why is it important for students to know about agriculture and food system in our food system? So everybody eats and everybody is inherently involved in agriculture in that way. And agriculture is such a vast and diverse industry. There's a lot that goes into it. And having students understand that there's lots of opportunities for them to be involved in agriculture and to make decisions regarding agriculture, whether that's from the production side of things, whether that's from the processing of food or the marketing of food or research. Today's students are far removed from production agriculture. Only about 1% of Oregonians are farmers. So that means that students might be unaware of several factors that are involved in getting food from farm to table. I mean, they probably know the general process of getting it there, but looking in depth into processing systems and how our food is processed and recognizing that those could be potential sites for food contamination. And that's kind of what this lesson today looks at is different locations where food could be contaminated and how to prevent that. And then one of my favorite things is agriculture provides an arena for real world discovery and problem solving. So there are several challenges that students today will be the ones to figure out solutions to make it more efficient for a continued healthy, safe food supply to be to meet the growing needs of our growing population. So a little bit about food illness. The CDC estimates that 1 in 6 people are affected each year, and also 128,000 are hospitalized, 3,000 people die from food-related illnesses. The USDA estimates that it costs more than $15.6 billion each year. And currently there are 31 pathogens that are tracked for foodborne illnesses, but there are also unidentified pathogens. And you can learn more about that on the CDC's website about which ones specifically they're tracking and more about the unidentified ones. So there's 3 kind of main agencies that work together in foodborne illness outbreaks. It's the CDC, the USDA, and the Food and Drug Administration. So the USDA has a specific sector that handles food safety and inspection. And so these are the people who go into restaurants and processing facilities and go on farm to perform inspections to ensure that companies and production facilities and processing plants are meeting the expectations set by the FDA and the USDA in regards to food safety. So there's annual inspections that they have to complete. And in this video on the right, we'll learn more about how these agencies work together to detect foodborne illnesses and what they do to kind of mitigate them moving forward.
As much information as possible to find the source, so we can take action to prevent more people from getting sick. To do this, public health and regulatory officials gather 3 types of data during an investigation: epidemiologic, traceback, and food and environmental testing to link illnesses to contaminated foods. Epidemiologic data takes several forms: patterns and where and when people got sick, and past outbreaks caused by the same germ. Interviews with sick people to look for foods or other exposures happening more often than expected, and discovery of clusters of unrelated sick people who ate at the same restaurant, shopped at the same grocery store, or attended the same event. The second type of data is collected through an investigation called traceback. Officials look for a common point of contamination in the distribution chain from farm to fork. We review records collected from restaurants or stores where sick people ate or shopped and conduct inspections in restaurants and food production facilities and on farms looking for food safety risks. Then there is food and environmental testing data. Scientists look for the germ that caused illness in a food item collected from a sick person's home or a retail location or in the food production environment. We analyze lab samples to determine if the DNA fingerprint of the germs found in sick people can be linked to the germs found in food or production environments. Health officials evaluate all these types of data to try and identify the source of the outbreak. We take action when there is clear and convincing information linking illness to a contaminated food. Health officials warn the public. Companies recall contaminated products, and restaurants or food production facilities might close temporarily. CDC is dedicated to constantly improving the ways we investigate and solve foodborne outbreaks. For more information on CDC's efforts to prevent foodborne illness and keep Americans healthy and safe, go to cdc.gov/foodsafety/outbreaks or cdc.gov/pulsenet.
We have a few questions. So now that you've heard some foodborne illness statistics, how would you connect food safety or foodborne illness in your classroom? So think about that and answer that one in the chat. And also, number two, do you think your students are concerned about foodborne illness? One of those things is sometimes trying to get students to actually be concerned about things that they aren't necessarily thinking about. So feel free to answer those in the chat. Yeah, I really think once you've had food poisoning or think you've had food poisoning, you definitely become concerned about it because you never want to feel like that again. But if you haven't had it, maybe you aren't thinking about it, and that's where you can have either localized or large scale outbreaks. Yeah, I think students working at restaurants to get a food servers, food handlers permit, like you're going to learn a lot more about that, and potentially if you haven't done that, you're not thinking about that, which can cause you to become sick or have unsafe practices. Anything else people can think about? Okay, so we're going to move on to the simulation. And Brittany, do you want to give an overview of the lesson?
Yeah, so in this lesson, students assume the role of a foodborne illness investigator, and they go through this simulation that we will go through in breakout rooms. The simulation is broke out into 3 different parts. So part 1, you are charged with identifying the outbreak. Part 2, determine the food that caused the outbreak. And part 3, where the source of the contamination occurred. So the worksheet that you'll see on the right in this screen follows along with each of these parts of the simulation, and it's very helpful for students to use that worksheet while they're going through the simulation, because there's lots of information that they will have to recall. And so being able to take notes as they go through it, it's going to be very helpful and reduce frustration that may occur if they don't take notes. But after that, then they will develop a 4 C's safety guide, and the 4 C's is cook, clean, cross-contamination prevention, and chill. And we'll talk more about that a little later, but basically it's having them choose a meal and prepare kind of a guide on how they can do it safely using those 4 C's. But we will break out into breakout rooms, so one room will be in each part of the simulation, and you will go through it, and you'll have a facilitator that will be in there with you, and you'll answer these questions, and one person from each group will bring the answers to these questions back to the group and kind of describe what their part of the simulation was, and the answer to the questions number 2 and 3.
Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you were able to get through your section of the simulation. And I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that? Excellent. So just if people would be willing to share out what they did in the breakout, kind of giving a sense of these things just really quickly. I realized we had small breakouts. Does anybody from breakout 1, the one that I was in, want to share out and talk about these 3? I'm kind of putting you on the spot. Sorry about that.
I can go.
Okay.
So in our simulation, we kind of looked at Listeria and where that was breaking out in Ohio, New York, and I think it was North Carolina. And in that, we kind of looked at the genetic sequencing of the outbreak, looked at all the different kinds of Listeria that was occurring. We kind of, I guess, started off by looking at just symptoms and then what they had. And then we tried to see, you know, did everyone have the same kind of Listeria? And then at the end, we kind of found that we need more information. It looks like there's a lot of Listeria going off around in the wild. We can't really confirm if there was a exact cause of this outbreak. I think it could be a standalone. I think the students would need some background on like the kind of sampling and sequencing they were doing for the polymerase chain reaction and the amplifying. But I think it was a good idea to let students kind of get at the idea that you know, bacteria is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and there's a lot of different strains that can cause similar things. I think one challenge I see with students is just tracking the information and then looking at those gels. Personally, I brand some gels. I think they're super cool. I like that genetic coding that goes on, but if you haven't seen them, the lines that show up, I think can be a little ambiguous and confusing because they just look like lines that are darker or lighter than other lines, rather than like, oh no, those are nucleotides that have been coded. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think section 1 does a really good job of talking, of letting students understand how many steps actually go into just identifying not only the pathogen, but looking at the background of that pathogen within the locales of where they're tracking it to see if a outbreak is actually happening. So much work goes into it. It's not just that one person gets sick and all of a sudden now there's an outbreak. They're really tracking not just the pathogen, but the strain of that pathogen, and then looking at the background of that pathogen over time to determine whether an outbreak actually occurred. And that is just 1/3 of the process that goes into actually making a recall, which is that end result that people hear about. So I think that's this could be done as a standalone just to kind of give students a sense of how that happens. Okay, breakout number 2. Who would like to share for breakout number 2?
That was us. So in our breakout, what we did is we knew that it was Listeria, and we were trying to figure out what type of food caused the breakout. So we took a group of people, sorry, my cat, a group of people who were sick, and we had to match them to a control group. So we looked at their age and race and medical history and paired them up with people who kind of matched them, and then looked at the type of foods that Listeria infected and asked both the control group and the infected group whether they ate those foods. And we looked at the difference on, you know, if the infected group ate it and the control group didn't and they got sick. And we came out with hot dogs was the biggest food that the infected group ate, but the control group didn't and they got sick. We were talking in our group, the teacher we had was relatively small school, rural. She said that her students tend to need too much information, so the standalone could have worked, but they seem to need a lot of information. So it made sense to me coming in group 2 because Brittany was able to give us kind of the background and you know, you already figured out that it was Listeria and that sort of thing. And then the challenges we saw were not so much with the internet, is the computer simulation itself. So Tammy mentioned that it was both like too easy, and then they would make it too hard because it was so easy. So trying to figure out how to balance that.
Excellent. Group number 3.
Do you want me to talk about it, Kathy? Okay, perfect. So we went through simulation 3, which at this point, of course, we know that it's from hot dogs and Listeria, and now we are trying to figure out where the contamination occurred. So students go through the pieces that identify where, so that you interview the people to determine where they had hot dogs, and then where the source of those hot dogs were. So again, it kind of is a nice part for students to be thinking about the process. When you go and you eat a hot dog from a, you know, a corner stand, it's not just coming from that corner stand, it's coming from a vendor, maybe 2 vendors, distributors, you know, there's lots of different points. So then the students work through that. And again, they're taking notes on the interviews of those people. And then it goes to, it talks about then the steps of determining where the bacteria is, and you determine that it's in the specific processing plant. Then it talks about how hot dogs are processed, and then you take swabs and you get lab results to determine the bacteria exist in 3 different areas of the processing plant. And then it takes you back to the to reading the films. And this is where I actually discovered a glitch in the system, and I'm not sure, Kathy, I think after I was playing with it here, the first time I did it, I went all the way through 1, 2, and 3, and I'm wondering if that's maybe why. But when I just did the 3rd and entered the password, it was getting no results on all 3 of there wasn't any matches. So I'm not sure yet exactly why that was, but I just did it again, 3rd time, and it still happened to me. So I'm not sure if that's a glitch on their end, but we'll have to figure that out. But like I said, I know it successfully works running through all the way through, but just picking it up at 3, it might not have the right data. So anyway, the meat contamination source is supposed to be the packaging line. They determine that, and then they continue to go through just discovering more about then the next steps of what happens, recalls and that kind of thing. Talks about USDA and their involvement in those pieces. So again, Kathy and I talked a little bit about, you know, how there's so many regulations that go into food processing, and oftentimes people think, oh, I can just start a restaurant. But there's a lot more to it than that, and there's a lot of things to think about. And so it's really good for students to kind of have that realization that they need this science, they need to understand the whys of why these regulations occur and things like that. So we both agree that it could be a standalone lesson, but it works a lot better in conjunction with the other 2, just to get that background and to really understand what the whole process is. And then, yeah, challenges. We obviously had a little bit of challenge with the reading of the lab, but we also talked about just working through the system, similar to what other groups had identified, that it's not always intuitive. The red little lights is kind of not really clear. And so as soon as students will figure that out, of course, we both said that students would probably figure it out way faster than we did. That's usually how it happens with these tech type things. But yeah, I think that overall it's a neat way for students to really get the idea of the process.
Thank you all for sharing. I definitely encourage you to try the other 2 sections that you haven't tried before. I'm gonna totally echo what Jessica just said around it's really interesting to understand this process, because we always just hear about the end result and don't really understand all the work that goes into keeping our food safe. And given the widespread of food, it becomes more and more challenging. You know, it's not just like the one processing plant is only serving close by. I mean, it could be serving the entire United States or going outside of the country. So a lot of really interesting questions or discussions that can be tacked on afterwards. But part of the lesson is, again, having students think about food safeties and ways that they can be safe as they are cooking. And so that's the 4 C's. So Brittany, do you want to talk about the 4 C's, which is sort of the end part of the lesson?
Yeah, so after students would go through that and kind of see how food outbreaks work and how the investigation occurs and recall, they can create a guide with their chosen favorite meal or favorite meal from a restaurant and talk about or create a graphic that describes how people can cook, clean, chill, and prevent cross-contamination and prevent ultimately foodborne illness through these 4 things with that chosen meal. So the CDC has created these graphics for grilling for summer and how to stay safe while doing that. In this first graphic, you'll see they use separate instead of cross-contaminate. But yeah, pretty easy to create something like that for a chosen meal and be able to have students not only learn the lesson, but take it into their homes and their families' meals. And I think there's a ton of different ways that you could have them do this, whether it be them creating something on a PowerPoint or drawing something on a flyer if they don't have resources for a computer, or, you know, there's tons of systems that they can create like infographics online for free. So any one of those would work great for this 4 C's guide.
And I think, you know, leading on there, you know, we've been really working on trying to make sure that the lessons that we provided during the series have different ways that students can access them, not just online, but also offline. And so I think this is the most challenging lesson that we've done so far because it relies heavily on a simulation. So we really were thinking, is there another way to simulate this lesson for students that do not have internet access? We talked about the 4 C's poster. I mean, the whole activity could really just be about thinking about summer. We're coming into summer, we're coming into warm weather, we're coming into going on picnics and camping. Hopefully we can do all those things. Grilling, like the slide before. How can students make sure that they are safe and their family safe when eating in these situations? So creating a 4 C's poster for their own summer usage, and then also different case studies that may be available that they wouldn't actually go through this process, but they could read about this process and think about the way that foodborne illness is tracked. And there's a number of resources that we have here that do that exact thing. So Brittany, do you want to talk about these 3?
Yes. So this top one is a curriculum that the FDA and a association of teachers created, all on food science. There's a ton of lessons on food science in this curriculum, and it's free, it's online. And then the second one is just a bunch of different facts related to foodborne illnesses provided by the CDC. And the CDC has tons of information on foodborne illnesses, as you would suspect, but great resource when talking about foodborne illness. And then this last one is actually a case study that was from this top curriculum. And it's just talking about a foodborne illness outbreak and kind of goes through what happens during the investigation in a readable form for students who maybe don't have access to internet connection or computer, that they can read a paper version of this.
So there's different options available. Ideally, you'd be able, and students would be able to utilize the simulation there to go through this process, but there are other options there. So as we're winding down, going over this lesson in this session, I just wanted to open it up for questions in, final questions or thoughts in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
So when I think about the statistic that 1 in 6 people experience food poisoning each year, I think a lot of it must be happening in the home and food preparation and stuff. And I don't know how it would be done, but it would be cool to, you know, somehow leave potato salad out overnight and test and see, like, you know, stuff that they have some control over. Like, you know, well, should you throw out that potato salad or should you keep it? But I don't know enough science to know how you would go there to, like, test stuff that went bad in your own house.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can tell if things are bad. You know, a lot of times, you know, at least in my house, we it was garbage day today, and we were kind of going through the refrigerator, and I pulled out some potatoes that I had made earlier in the week, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna eat these, and I opened it up, and there was this bad smell that was coming. So I didn't, you know, didn't have to, you know, that was a sign to me that potentially something's wrong with these. I'm not going to eat them. And so there's, I think, a lot of signs that you can see at home that determine if food is safe to eat or not, or do you want to take that chance with eating that, even though it maybe smells a little off, or there's like a sheen on the top of it. But I like the idea if you have a way to sort of see what sorts of bacteria are growing there, and some of it might not be pathogenic, and some of it could be pathogenic. I think it would be difficult to determine that, but just the idea that bacteria are there, and you can grow them. I've seen an interesting activity where they've taken bread and spread it on bread, and you get things to grow on bread fairly easily. So another thought there. Well, if there's any more questions, please put them in the chat. I want to thank people for attending. We do have an exciting week next week. There's going to be 2 sessions, not just our regular Tuesday session. Tuesday we'll be doing fact checking and a lesson, and I think this one's really timely. It's been one of our most popular lessons. It talks to and teaches students skills around fact checking, especially in the area of fake news and social media. And so we'll be looking at examples around genetically modified organisms and fact checking, but this lesson is really applicable to many things that are occurring currently. And then on Thursday, from 12 to 1, we'll be having a group of food science students actually be presenting lessons on food safety and food choices for middle school students. So please tune in with us. You can register for both of those at our website here. And again, we'll be offering PDUs. If you don't get one, email at us at precollegeprogram@oregonstate.edu. We're always here to answer your questions. If you have any questions about this lesson or others, feel free to email us. With that, thank you very much, and we hope to see you next week.